Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Completionist. So for this episode, guys, I have to get back to what this channel is really all about, and I'm going to show you how to complete a game that I've been trying to complete over the last year, and that game is Breath of Fire 3 for the PlayStation 1. Now, Breath of Fire 3 is a JRPG that was released in North America for the PlayStation 1 in 1998, and it did have a re-release on the PSP in the mid-2000s. And it's the much beloved third entry in the Breath of Fire series, and to a lot of fans, they actually consider this game, to be the best in the actual series. So when it comes to completing this game, guys, it is quite a daunting task. The reason why I say this is that the goals when it comes to completing this game are pretty straightforward. You only really need to play the game once, even though you do need 2 save files, because the game does have 2 different endings. So you need to basically create 2 different save files at the very end of the game. So as you see here, the top save file, that is for the bad ending, and the save file right here that says clear, this is for the good ending of the game. But with regards to the completionist aspects of this game, guys, one of the reasons why this game can be a daunting challenge to complete to 100% is that it's really based on luck. That's what it comes down to. Because one of the most challenging aspects you're going to find with this game is that in order to get some of the best weapons and the best armor in the game is that you're going to have to literally roll the dice and hope you're lucky, because some of the best weapons and armor in the game can only be gotten by a random enemy drop. And I'll be the first to admit, the random enemy drops with regards to certain items are beyond insane. And one of the hardest items to get in the game is Ryu's most powerful sword, which is the Goo King sword. And that's going to be one of the things I'm going to show you guys is like the best technique to try to get some of the really rare enemy drops that this game has to offer. But some of the other completionist aspects I'm going to address in this game is, we need to get all the dragon genes, which helps Ryu transform into all kinds of different dragons. We're going to focus on how to gain all the enemy skills in the game, how to get all the masters in the game as well, and how to fill out your item, weapon, and armor lists as well. So anyway, guys, with the game in hand, let me show you how to fully complete Breath of Fire 3 for the PlayStation 1. Breath of Fire 3 is a very beautiful RPG game that was released for the PlayStation 1 in 1998 and is often regarded as one of the best games in the Breath of Fire series. But it all really depends on who you ask. One of the strongest aspects of the Breath of Fire games is the first 4 games are highly praised by fans of the Breath of Fire series and even RPG fans in general. So when it comes to determining what the best Breath of Fire game is, it's really hard to tell because you're guaranteed to get a different answer from each gamer, because each entry has its own sense of personal value to any individual gamer that has played the series. The game in itself is a turn-based RPG that does enough to make it different from the earlier entries in the Breath of Fire series, but it still retains the core values and what makes the Breath of Fire series enjoyable. You can literally fall in love with how the game looks and how the game sounds, even though it doesn't really do anything innovative when it comes to turn-based RPG battle mechanics. When it comes to completing this game to 100%, you'll be happy to know that you'll only need to play this game once. There are a total of 2 endings, but they can be obtained on one playthrough. At the very end of the game, before you fight the final boss, you'll be given 2 choices on what you want to do, and all depending on the choice you make, it will give you an ending. One ending will result in you not fighting the final boss of the game, and the other ending will result you in fighting the final boss of the game. The best way to go about this is to simply create 2 save files when you reach that point in the game. That way you don't have to sacrifice any progress when it comes to completing this game to 100%. With regards to completion, there are some basic things we'll need to take into consideration. One of the most standard rules when it comes to completing RPGs is you need to go above and beyond to find every item, weapon, and piece of armor that you can find. And this will usually result in trying to open every treasure chest, loot bag you can find, regardless if it's in a town or in a dungeon. There are no checklists with regards to weapons, items, armor that you need to fill out in the game, but it's something we should all strive for when it comes to completing an RPG to 100%. You'll also be happy to know that there isn't a bestiary that you need to fill out either, but you need to keep in mind that a lot of monsters do drop items, and some monsters even drop incredibly rare items, which have an incredibly low drop rate. With these basic rules put into effect, let's look at some of the main completionist aspects when it comes to completing Breath of Fire 3 to 100%. One of the main things you need to collect through the entire game are skills. Skills can be obtained one of 2 ways. They can be obtained from masters that you meet along your journey, or they can be learned from specific enemies when they perform a certain attack. There are a total of 80 skills that you can obtain in the game. Let's focus on getting skills from the enemies first. You can obtain an enemy skill when you select the Examine command in the battle menu when you're in a random battle, or on the scatter occasion, enemy skills can be learned from a boss fight as well. But please keep in mind the Examine skill works at random and you may need to select it several times and wait for the monster to perform the specified attack. You know you have learned the skill if an exclamation point appears on top of the character's head as the monster is performing it. Also, an enemy skill can only be learned once, and once you have learned it the first time, you can assign it to any character by using Skill Ink to assign different enemy skills to specific characters. Just keep in mind that the Examine command only works for certain attacks that the monster performs, and not every monster in the game has an attack that can be learned. It is also important to note that during the first half of the game, I would not use the Examine command for Tipo since he leaves you fairly early in the game. I would also recommend that you try to get an enemy skill the first chance you get, because some enemies have very strict conditions in order for them to pull off a certain move. When using a guide to complete this game, and trust me, you will need to use a guide in order to complete this game to 100%. Anytime you go to a new area or a new dungeon, check which enemies are going to show up in that area and see if there are any enemy skills you can learn. The last thing I will mention with regards to learning skills from enemies is that you can even learn specific skills from bosses, such as the boss Arwen, who uses the Chill skill. The reason why I did not go after the Chill skill in this boss fight is you can get it from an enemy known as the Revenant in the final dungeon of the game. So keep that in mind when fighting one of the many bosses in this game, that skills can also be learned from boss fights. The second way we can obtain skills are from masters. Masters are unique characters in the game that you can assign any of your playable characters to learn under. Once a character is learning under a specific master, they can learn between 2 to 5 skills that a specified master has to offer once they gain a certain number of levels. Once a certain amount of levels have been reached, then the master has nothing more to offer you and his or her training has been completed. You need to keep checking back with the master multiple times, and once he or she says they have nothing more to teach you, then you have gained all the abilities that master has to offer. If you wanted to make sure, when you set camp and check the book inside the tent, you can see the master lists and it shows you all the masters that you have met so far. And if there is a star next to the master's name, then you have learned all the skills from that master. There are a total of 17 masters in the game, and you need to meet certain requirements before you can train under a specific master. For example, Fall in the Monster Arena will only train you if you fight 30 battles in a row without resting. And Alonzo in the Coffee Shop will only train you if you have 15 different kinds of weapons in your inventory. Masters not only teach you skills, but they can also give you more battle formations than the original 3 that you started off with. When you finish the hide-and-seek side quests in the second half of the game, all 4 of the grown children give you an opportunity to take them on as masters in the city of Windia, next to the fountain. When you gain 3 levels with each master from the hide-and-seek side quest, 3 of them will give you a new battle formation to use in battle, such as the Refuge Formation, the Chain Formation, and the Magic Formation. The last remaining person out of the group will give you an item after you gain 3 levels. Besides skills, items, and battle formations, masters can also provide positive and negative stat boosts to your characters as well. Assign members to your characters, all depending on which character's stats you want increased or decreased. Here is one of the most important things regarding skills that I've learned while trying to complete this game. You may notice as you play through the game that some of your characters might not be able to learn skills from enemies anymore, or when they're training under a certain master and after you gain a certain number of levels, they don't teach you a specific skill. The reason why this happens is that your skill list is completely filled out for a particular character, and you need to use an item called Skill Ink to remove skills from your list, so you'll always have room to learn new skills. You can do this when you go camping and check the book inside the tent. I would constantly check your skill list every time you finish with a master or when you learn a couple of skills from an enemy. You can see your skill list when you open up the character menu and select the rod icon, or you can also check the rod icon when you get into a battle. Finally, this is a list of all 80 skills in the game. Charm is probably one of the most important skills in the game, and it should be on one of your party members at all time because it's absolutely needed when it comes to getting some of the best weapons and armor in this game. So with this last tidbit of information, we are finally done with skills. Let's move on with the next completionist aspect, which is collecting all the dragon genes in the game. Just like other Breath of Fire games, the main character Ryu has the ability to turn into a dragon. This is done through the use of dragon genes. There are a total of 18 dragon genes that you can collect. Some of these dragon genes you will automatically get because it's integral to the story, but some of the dragon genes will need to be found all around the world. The dragon genes are usually found inside crystals that are sometimes well hidden in select areas of the world map, and you can even find them in dungeons as well. So always keep an eye out for them and try to get them the first chance you get. You can mix and match a total of 3 genes to get a wide array of different dragons, each with their advantages and disadvantages. So don't be afraid to mix and match different dragon genes to see the type of dragon that you get for yourself. The best dragon combination is used when combining the Infinity Gene, Radiance Gene, and Trance Gene, which will give you access to the Kaiser Dragon. When it comes to obtaining all the dragon genes, please understand that the game is divided into 2 parts, and I want to specify how many genes you should have in your inventory during each half of the game. During the first half of the game, when Ryu is a child, you should have a total of 8 dragon genes if you've been using a guide. Those genes are the Flame gene, the Defender gene, the Reverse gene, the Thorn gene, the Frost gene, the Thunder gene, the Eldritch gene, and the Miracle gene. During the second half of the game, when Ryu becomes an adult, you can get the remaining 10 dragon genes if you've been using the guide. Those genes are the Shadow gene, the Fusion gene, the Force gene, the Gross gene, the Mystery gene, the Mutant gene, the Trance gene, the Failure gene, the Radiance gene, and the Infinity gene. Once you get all these 18 dragon genes, then you have the ability to turn into any dragon in the game. This takes care of the main completionist aspects of the game, so now let's look at some other things that we need to watch out for when it comes to completing this game to 100%. With regards to each individual character, they all have a set number of spells and skills they can learn once they reach a specific level, but you should aim to get every character to at least level 40. If every character gets to level 40, then they will learn all their set spells, skills in the game. Trust me, it shouldn't be hard to get your characters up past level 40, especially with the amount of grinding you'll have to do in the game to get those blasted rare drops from specific enemies. Much like any RPG, there are a ton of side quests and mini-games that you will need to complete in order to make sure you get everything in this game completed to 100%. You're going to spend a ton of time fishing. There are a total of 17 fishing spots with a total of 23 different types of ocean creatures to catch. These are the types of fish you can catch overall. The whale, barandi, angler, and spearfish are going to give you the biggest trouble. Each fishing location will have a few different kinds of fish, so you'll need to visit each location to make sure you get all 23 types of ocean creatures. Just keep in mind that you will need to use different lures to attract different fish, and as you progress through the game you will get different rods that will make the fishing a little easier. Seven out of the 17 fishing locations will have fish merchants called Manillos, in which you can trade your fish with. The fish you trade will give you an opportunity to get rare items, which are needed if you want to fill out your weapon armor item lists. And the only lure that will work for the Manillo is the coin. One of the perks when trying to catch Manillo is that no matter where you cast the coin, the Manillo will always follow it. Cast the coin close to the shore, so when Manillo grabs it, you don't have to spend a lot of time reeling him in order to get access to his store. The main goal when it comes to fishing is to build up your fish score to 9,500 points. If you build up your score up to 9,000 points, you'll get access to the Master Rod, which is one of the best fishing rods in the game. And you'll get access to ding frogs, which are some of the best bait in the game. But if you can get your point total up to 9,500 points, you'll get access to an item called the Fountain Pen. The Fountain Pen allows to change skills around your characters without using up precious skill ink. All these items are provided by this character in this location, but you can only get them once the game is beaten for the first time. The fishing in this game is a major time sink, but in a way it can be relaxing, and it's a good way to break up the monotony of the game since it can be pretty grind heavy from time to time. One of the most important side quests in the game is known as the Fairy Village. This side quest is opened up to you in the second half of the game when Ryu is an adult, and you have to help rebuild the Fairy Village. This is another side quest that can take a considerable amount of time, but if you put enough time into it, then you can get access to some of the best weapons, armor, and items in the game. You're best going through a guide to know how to do the fairy village correctly, but the key aspect is to always keep your fairies fed or they will die. I'll try to sum it up the best I can. You can get access to the fairy village by going through the flower rings, which are scattered throughout the entire world map. When you visit the fairy village, your main goal is you should try to build up your population as fast as you can so you can get more stuff done. Your fairy population can be as many as 20 fairies, but until you reach 20 fairies, half of your fairies should be dedicated to hunting. When you reach the maximum amount of fairies, you can drop down the amount of fairies to 1/3 of your total amount instead of 1/2. Your fairies are divided into 4 abilities highlighted by a different color, which shows that some fairies are better at certain tasks than others. Red means that the fairy excels at hunting and exploring. Green means that the fairy excels at building and clearing. Dark blue means that the fairy is good at the merchant shop, antique shop, and the inn. And light blue means that the fairy is good at the copy shop, being a fortune teller, and developing new jobs for the fairy village. Once you start the fairy village side quest, your main focus should be building and clearing in order to expand the village as much as possible. Your secondary focus should be developing new jobs and the culture of the village to maximize the usefulness of the village. The maximum culture level you can get is 7, so keep that in mind. You can assign fairies to a total of 10 different jobs. Just keep in mind that the more fairies you assign to each job, the faster a specific job will develop or the more prizes you will get. You set a maximum of 3 fairies to each specified job, all depending on what you want to get out of that job. Those 10 jobs are Scholar, which is necessary to develop jobs and culture for your village. Merchant. You can develop up to 3 different merchant stores with 2 subcategories for each store. The Inn, an area where you can rest and save your game. Gift Shop. Fairies will give you gifts, and the longer you wait to talk to them, the better gifts you'll get. Fortune Teller. Fairies will provide you useful information if you're lost. Explorer. You can send fairies out on quests to bring back rare items, but they can also die if they're not successful. Antique Shop. Fairies will give you an opportunity to sell items that you can't sell at any other location in the game. Music Shop. An area where you can play any of the tracks from the Breath of Fire 3 game. Casino. You can play casino games with the fairies. And the Copy Shop, in which fairies can create a copy of your item, but it's not always successful. There are quite a few excellent online resources if you want to maximize the most out of the fairy village. The key thing is to always save right before you enter the fairy village, just to make sure that none of your fairies die, and you want to get some of the best items that the village has to offer. But sometimes getting the best items in the village is really based on luck. These are the 2 major side quests that you can undertake when it comes to completing Breath of Fire 3. There are smaller side quests such as finding items in the Desert of Death or playing the hide-and-seek game with the grown-up kids from Windia, but they are generally part of the normal playthrough when it comes to completing this game. The next thing we are going to focus on is defeating the 2 special enemies in an area known as the Container Yard. Even though these 2 enemies are probably some of the most difficult enemies in the game, they are still worth fighting because they do yield some very important weapons and armor that you can only get if you fight them and defeat them. The first enemy is called the Berserker, and it's often regarded as much more difficult than the final boss if you don't come prepared. Equip flame rings to absorb his flame whip attack, and dedicate Ryu to attacking this enemy by using focus when you transform into the Kaiser Dragon. The other 2 characters should act as backup in order to protect Ryu. Try to steal from this enemy because he yields a piece of armor called the Ares Gloves, which is one of the best shields in the game. You should also get one of the characters to cast Charm on this enemy as well, because the enemy might drop one of the best spears for Gar, called the Belfad Spear. With enough persistence, you should be able to beat this enemy since he has a high amount of HP. The second enemy is known as the Archmage. and while it doesn't have as much HP as the Berserker has, its attacks are still devastating and can usually kill a character in one hit. Use the same strategy as you did with the Berserker, with Ryu being your main attacker by combining Focus with his Kaiser Dragon form. Make sure at least one of your characters is wearing an item that protects you from lightning attacks. You can steal a soul gem from this enemy as well. When you defeat this enemy, you get Rei's best weapon, known as the Holy Avenger. The final topic that we are going to talk about is by far the most frustrating aspect of this game when it comes to completing it to 100%. The topic is going to be focused on getting every weapon, armor, and item in the game, which means we are going to have to deal with the atrocious drop rates that some enemies have. What makes this even more frustrating is that these enemy drops offer some of the best weapons, armor, and items in the game. I can't be nice about this because the drop rates to get these things are beyond frustrating and will require a bit of patience and a lot of luck, but I'll show you how to make the pain of trying to obtain these items a little easier. The majority of the enemies that you will fight that yield some very powerful items will reside in the final dungeon of the game, known as the Miria Station. Rei and Ryu should be in your party at all times when trying to get some of the best items in the game, and the other characters should have the charm skill in their inventory. The purpose of the charm skill is that it decreases an enemy's drop rate by half. So for example, if an enemy has a rare drop, such as 1 out of 256, the charm skill also decreases the drop rate of that enemy down to 1 out of 128. Most enemies can have a different item, all depending if you steal from the enemy or you allow the enemy to drop its item instead. The only thing you should watch out for is that an item you can steal from the enemy can act as the enemy's drop as well. So besides casting charm on the enemy, you should use Rei's pilfer command or the steal skill to steal the item this enemy has to offer. Because once the enemy is defeated, the only item the enemy can drop is its rare drop, which unfortunately doesn't happen very often because of the enemy's atrocious drop rates. Let's have a look at some of the enemies in Breath of Fire 3 that offer really excellent items despite their low drop rates. The Mistman enemy, which carries one of the best armors in the game, called the Mist Armor, has a drop rate of 1 out of 64, but with the charm skill you can lower that drop rate down to 1 out of 32. The problem with this enemy is that you have to kill him in one turn, 2 turns if you're lucky. If you get a message saying that his armor is cracked, then even when you kill this enemy you have 0 chance of obtaining this armor. The Revenant enemy carries Nina's best armor in the game, known as Diana's Dress, and it has a drop rate of 1 out of 256. But with the charm skill, you can lower that drop rate down to 1 out of 128. You can also steal Belladonnas from these enemies as well, so you should cast charm and try to steal the Belladonna from them before you defeat them to give you the best opportunity of obtaining the Diana's Dress. The vampire enemy carries one of the best weapons for Rei, known as the Lifestealer. The Lifestealer has a drop rate of 1 out of 128, but with the charm skill, you can lower that drop rate down to 1 out of 64. You can also steal a piece of armor from this enemy, known as the Burglar Garb. So cast charm and steal the Burglar Garb in order to give you the best chance of obtaining the Lifestealer. The last enemy we are going to address is the bane of existence for every Breath of Fire 3 player. The enemy we are going to talk about is the Goo King, which drops Ryu's best weapon, which is the Goo King sword. Unfortunately, the drop rate for the Goo King sword is 1 out of 256, but at least the charm skill will lower that drop rate down to 1 out of 128. When you encounter this enemy, you must steal the green apple from him first, because after the first turn, the enemy will usually run away. It's imperative that Ray has a high speed stat, which is why I equipped this character with 2 pairs of speed boots. The Goo King also attacks you with some of the strongest spells in the game, and has a good amount of HP. But ultimately, you're going to have to be really patient and really lucky to try to obtain the Goo King sword. What a surprise, it didn't drop it. As we enjoy the ending, I just want to provide some final thoughts. As much as it pains me to say this, you will need to use a guide to complete this game to 100%. There are just too many things you have to constantly watch out for, and I highly recommend when it comes to any kind of collectible in this game, regardless if it's skills, dragon genes, or weapons, armor, and items, you try to get as much as you can at your first available moment. It is quite a daunting game to complete, but I can understand why a lot of people have a lot of fondness for this entry in the Breath of Fire series. The pain of trying to get every item in the game makes this scene in the game that much more worth it, because it's one of the most beautiful pieces of art that I've ever seen for a PlayStation 1 game. So there we have it, guys. We have successfully fully completed Breath of Fire 3 for the PlayStation 1. It's as I said before, guys, it really is a daunting game to fully complete, because even though the completionist goals in this game are pretty straightforward, you know, the amount of time you can spend on this game is really going to depend on luck, because unfortunately we have no control over when certain item drops are going to happen, you know, when it comes to getting some of the rarest items in the game. And, you know, some of the other side quests in the game, such as fishing and the fairy village, can take a considerable amount of time as well. But the thing is that I have personally spent a lot of time in this game just simply grinding. You know, I could have beaten the boss maybe at level 40 to level 45, but by the time I got around to beating the final boss of this game, is I was around level 60. So I literally spent anywhere from 15 to 20 levels just simply leveling up completely by accident, trying to get some of the best items in the game. But, you know, if you have the patience and you have the perseverance, you know, it's definitely worth doing, but I will highly recommend that it is not for everybody. So unless you're a glutton for punishment, and you know you really want to put your patience to the test with regards to getting all the best items in the game, then this game is definitely worth a try. Now, if you do enjoy Breath of Fire 3, other games I can definitely recommend for the PlayStation 1 is Breath of Fire 4, which is another much beloved game in the Breath of Fire series. But you can also check out the first 2 Breath of Fire games for the Super Nintendo, which is Breath of Fire 1 and Breath of Fire 2. A lot of fans of the Breath of Fire series, you know, consider, you know, the first 4 games to be incredibly solid, enjoyable JRPG experiences. So if you do enjoy Breath of Fire 3, I highly recommend you give those other 3 games a try. So anyway, guys, that takes care of another episode of The Completionist. So as always, take care, and I wish you nothing but the best.